Good evening, dear listeners, and a very warm welcome to you all. Wherever you are tuning in from tonight, maybe cozied up in bed, listening from your favorite quiet corner at home, or perhaps relaxing somewhere peaceful with the world fading away outside. I'm so glad you've joined me here. Take a slow, deep breath. Let your shoulders drop. Maybe pull the covers up a bit higher and feel the day gently slip away. Let the story begin. It was a chill autumn evening in London, 1887, when the fog wrapped the gas lamps like a shroud and the Thames breathed its damp, fishy breath into the streets. I had not seen Holmes so energized in weeks. Then came the desperate knock at our door. A veiled young woman, trembling, who burst into 221B Baker Street with terrifying news. At the glittering charity gala in the Royal Albert Hall, her wealthy father, Sir Reginald Hargrove, had collapsed and died in front of hundreds of guests. The doctors called it a simple heart attack, but she knew the truth. He had been poisoned, and the ancient Egyptian locket he proudly displayed that night, said to carry a deadly curse, had vanished from his body. Scotland Yard believed it was nothing more than a tragic coincidence. Holmes, however, saw what others missed. Within the hour, we were racing through the fog-shrouded streets toward a mystery darker than any curse. Chapter 1. A case presents itself. It was a chill autumn in London, 1887, when the fog clung thick to the gas lamps and the Thames breathed its dank, fish-laden breath into the streets. The leaves in the parks lay as sodden brown carpets underfoot, and the air carried the sharp bite of coal smoke mixed with the distant, tempting tang of roasting chestnuts from vendors near Charing Cross. I had not seen Holmes so energized in weeks. His violin had lain silent upon the table, and the Persian slipper containing his shag tobacco sat untouched on the mantelpiece. The rooms at 221B Baker Street felt heavy with idleness, the leather armchairs creaking only beneath my own restless movements. Then came the sharp, insistent knock at the door. Mrs. Hudson announced our visitor with concern in her voice, a young woman, veiled and trembling, who had arrived in a hansom cab whose wheels still dripped with riverfront mud. She entered our sitting room in a swirl of damp wool and faint lavender perfume, her gloved hands clutching a small reticule. "Mr. Holmes," she began, her voice low and cultured, yet edged with desperation, "I fear for my life. Medicine for the life of my brother. My name is Miss Eleanor Hargrove. Last night, at the Royal Albert Hall during the charity gala for the East End Missions, my father, Sir Reginald Hargrove, collapsed and died. The doctors called it apoplexy, a sudden seizure of the heart. But I know it was not. He was poisoned." Holmes leaned forward in his chair, his grey eyes gleaming with that familiar predatory light. He steepled his fingers, the tips pressed together. "Pray continue, Miss Hargrove. Every detail, no matter how trivial." Sir Reginald Hargrove had been a prominent importer of Eastern antiquities, his warehouses lining the docks near Wapping. Wealthy, influential, and recently returned from a buying trip to Cairo, he had worn a peculiar gold locket that evening, heavy, set with a single blood-red carnelian said to have come from the tomb of an ancient Egyptian priest. Rumours among the gala guests claimed the locket carried a curse. Those who possessed it met untimely ends. Sir Reginald had laughed off such superstitions, displaying the piece proudly during the intermission. Yet, within an hour of the second act, he had clutched his throat, gasped for air, and fallen dead amid the orchestra's swelling crescendo. "The locket is missing," Miss Hargrove whispered, her breath visible in the cooling room. "Taken from his body before the constables arrived. My brother Arthur was with him, but he swears he saw nothing. Scotland Yard believes it a simple theft coinciding with natural death. But father had enemies, rival collectors, perhaps even foreign agents seeking the artifacts he dealt in." Holmes rose and paced once across the worn Axminster carpet, his dressing gown whispering against the fabric. The gala was public and crowded. Poison at such an event suggests opportunity seized in plain sight. Who dined near your father? Who approached him during the evening? Miss Hargrove listed the names with trembling precision. Her brother Arthur, a dissolute gambler, deep in debt. Mr. Theodore Langley, Sir Reginald's business partner, with whom he had argued fiercely over a recent shipment. Lady Amelia Voss, a widow and rival collector whose own Egyptian pieces had mysteriously vanished months earlier. Dr. Elias Crowe, the family physician who had examined the body at the scene. And a mysterious Egyptian gentleman, Mr. Ahmed Farouk, introduced as a fellow antiquarian but unknown to the family. The locket was the centerpiece, she added. Father claimed it held a fragment of an ancient scroll, a map to lost treasures. He planned to unveil it after the gala. Holmes's eyes narrowed. And the poison? How was it administered, in your view? In his wine during the toast, or perhaps in the oysters served at the private supper beforehand. The symptoms were swift, burning throat, labored breathing, collapse. Not the slow agony of some toxins, but something potent and fast-acting. We departed within the hour. The hansom cab rattled over cobblestones, slick with mist. The air tasted of damp earth and horse sweat as we made our way to the Hargrove residence in Kensington. The house loomed grey and imposing, like its stone facade cold to the touch when I steadied myself against it. Inside, the drawing-room smelled of beeswax polish on mahogany furniture and the lingering sharpness of funeral lilies. Arthur Hargrove met us there, his face flushed, eyes bloodshot. "This is madness," he snapped, his voice rough. "Father died of natural causes. The locket was stolen by some opportunist in the chaos. Eleanor is hysterical." Langley was also present, a portly man with mutton-chop whiskers and a waistcoat faintly stained with ink or oil. Reginald and I disagreed on many things, he admitted, over a glass of port that carried the rich, fruity aroma of aged wine. But I had no reason to harm him. Our business thrived on his finds. Lady Voss arrived shortly after, her silk gown rustling softly, her perfume a heavy musk of patchouli. But the locket was beautiful, cursed or not, but I do not steal or kill. Dr. Crowe examined the medical notes with us, his hands steady on paper that crackled under his touch. Apoplexy? Plain as day. No signs of poison in the preliminary examination. The Egyptian, Farouk, could not be located immediately. He vanished after the intermission, Miss Hargrove said. Holmes knelt by the fireplace in the study where Sir Reginald had last sat, before the gala. He produced his lens and examined the hearthrug. "Observe, Watson," he murmured. "These faint traces of reddish dust, fine as talc mixed with grains of sand, not London soot. Egyptian, unless I miss my guess. And here," he pointed to a small discoloration on the leather blotter, cool and smooth beneath my fingertip. "A drop of liquid, evaporated, but leaving a faint oily residue." I peered closely, but saw only ordinary dust and a minor stain. I confess I noticed nothing unusual in those first moments, though perhaps you, dear reader, were more observant than I. The significance of that small stain and the reddish dust escaped me entirely. I wonder if it escaped you as well? Holmes straightened, a grim satisfaction crossing his features. Sir Reginald's death was no accident of the heart, nor mere theft. The locket was the key, but not as a cursed relic. It was taken because it contained something far more valuable than gold, proof of provenance that threatens someone's interests. The past has a way of reaching into the present with deadly fingers, Watson. The ground, the objects, the very air we breathe, they remember. As evening fell and the gas lamps hissed to life outside, casting flickering shadows on the fog-shrouded streets, we returned to Baker Street with more questions than answers. Miss Hargrove's plea echoed in my mind, and the missing locket seemed to pulse with unseen menace. What secrets did it hold, and who, among the gala's glittering crowd, had silenced Sir Reginald to claim them? The night air carried the distant rumble of carriages and the mournful call of a foghorn from the river, promising that the truth lay somewhere in London's labyrinthine heart. I could not shake the feeling that we had only scratched the surface, and that darker currents waited beneath. Chapter 2. Into London streets. The following morning dawned grey and raw, and with a biting wind that whipped through the alleys carrying the acrid bite of coal smoke from 1,000 chimneys. Holmes and I ventured first to the Royal Albert Hall, its grand dome looming under a sky the colour of damp slate. The interior still held faint echoes of the previous night's music, but now the velvet draperies hung silent and heavy with dust. The air inside felt cooler than the streets, laced with the musty smell of old wood and polished brass railings that felt slick under my palm. We interviewed the hall's manager, Mr. Wilkins, a nervous man whose starched collar chafed audibly against his neck. The supper was served in the private salon, he explained, his voice echoing off the marble floors. Oysters from Whitstable, champagne, canapes with smoked salmon. Sir Reginald dined at the head table with his party, and dozens attended. Society folk, donors, even some performers from the concert. Holmes examined the table linen, now laundered but still bearing faint creases. The wine glasses, were they cleared immediately? Most were, sir. Chaos after the collapse. One of Sir Reginald's glasses was knocked over. The staff mopped it hastily. From there, we moved to the docks at Wapping. The Thames reeked of salt, sewage and tar from the ships, a thick odour that coated the back of the throat. Gulls screamed overhead, their cries mingling with the clang of loading cranes and the shouts of stevedores. The wooden planks underfoot were rough and splintered, slick with moisture, while the air tasted of brine and the metallic tang of machinery oil. The warehouse foreman, Jack Dolan, a burly man with calloused hands like sandpaper, it led us through stacks of crates stamped with Egyptian markings. Sir Reginald brought in a shipment 2 weeks ago. He grunted, his breath visible in the chill. Statues, scrolls, jewellery. That locket was part of it, but there was trouble. Some crates arrived damaged, as if forced open. Langley met us there, his boots crunching on the gravel-strewn ground. Reginald suspected sabotage, he admitted, wiping sweat from his brow despite the cold. His coat smelled of damp wool and cigar tobacco, rich and earthy. Rivals in the trade. Farouk was sniffing around the shipment, offering to buy select pieces outright. Next, we called at the home of Lady Amelia Voss in Mayfair. Her townhouse was warm, with the scent of fresh-baked scones and rosewater. The drawing-room fabrics were plush velvet, soft under the hand, contrasting the hard chill of the street outside. She received us in a gown of deep burgundy silk that whispered with each movement. I admired the locket, yes, she said, sipping tea that carried the delicate floral notes of Darjeeling. But curse. Nonsense. Sir Reginald flaunted it to provoke. He and I competed for the same artifacts from the Black Pyramid dig. Her maid, a quiet girl with roughened hands from scrubbing, lingered nearby. I saw nothing odd at the gala, she murmured when questioned separately. But the Egyptian gentleman argued with Sir Reginald in the foyer during intermission, voices raised, though I couldn't hear the words. Dr. Crow's surgery in Harley Street was our fourth stop. The air inside was sharp with the clean, stinging smell of carbolic acid and iodine. Brass instruments gleamed coldly on trays, their metal surfaces icy to the touch. The doctor, his spectacles fogging slightly in the warmer room, shook his head. I examined the body at the scene. No unusual odours, no marks of injection. Heart failure, exacerbated by rich food and excitement. Arthur Hargrove. We found at his club, near St. James's. The leather chairs creaked under his weight, and the room hung heavy with the aroma of aged brandy and pipe tobacco. Latakia, dark and smoky. He was playing cards, his fingers stained with nicotine, the cards smooth and slightly worn at the edges. Debts? He laughed bitterly, the sound harsh against the murmur of conversation and clink of glasses. Yes, I owed money. Father threatened to cut me off, but kill him. I stood to lose everything. Consider the facts as we knew them then. The reddish Egyptian dust in the study. Made the missing locket, The swift collapse after the supper, the rivalries over artifacts, and the foreign gentleman who had vanished. 3 men and 2 women had clear opportunity at the gala. 3 had financial motives tied to debts or business disputes. Which would you suspect first, dear reader? I set down these details precisely as Holmes observed them. The reader may draw their own conclusions from the evidence accumulating like the fog over the river. Holmes remained mostly silent during these interviews, his pipe occasionally lit, sending curls of Virginia tobacco smoke into the air. But his eyes gleamed whenever a discrepancy arose. The foreman's mention of forced crates, Lady Voss's casual knowledge of the Black Pyramid, Arthur's nervous laugh. As dusk fell, the gas lamps flickered on with a soft pop, casting pools of yellow light on wet pavements that reflected the rumble of omnibuses and the distant peal of church bells. We returned to Baker Street, weary, the cab's wheels splashing through puddles that smelled of mud and horse dung. Questions multiplied with every turn. Was the poison in the food, the wine, or something touched only by Sir Reginald? Why take the locket if the death was meant to look natural? The Thames whispered its secrets from afar, and I could not escape the sense that the streets of London held fragments of the truth, scattered like the autumn leaves under our feet. The mystery deepened, pulling us further into its shadowed embrace. Chapter 3. Deeper Waters. We returned to the crime scene the next day. The private salon at the Royal Albert Hall now cleared of its gala finery, but still carrying the faint, their stale scent of spilled champagne and wilted flowers. The temperature inside was markedly cooler than the bustling streets, where vendors hawked hot pies whose savoury steam mixed with the ever-present coal smoke. The carpet underfoot was thick pile, muffling our steps, while the wooden tables felt sticky in places from hasty cleaning. Holmes moved methodically, his lens glinting under the electric lights. He examined the head table, running his fingers over the polished wood grain, smooth yet marked with faint scratches. Here, Watson. The faint ring where a glass stood, and nearby a tiny fragment of what appears to be dried resin or sap. Significant evidence emerged when we inspected the dustbins behind the hall where discarded linens and broken glass had been tossed. Among the refuse, Holmes retrieved a small cork stopper, its surface rough and impregnated with a sticky substance that smelled faintly chemical, like laboratory ether mixed with something herbal. The air there was rank with rotting food scraps and damp paper. "Observe this," Holmes said, holding it to the light. "The cork bears traces of a rare alkaloid derived from Egyptian flora, known to ancient physicians but refined in modern laboratories for its rapid paralytic effect on the respiratory system. Not the crude poisons of the street, but something precise, administered perhaps in a drop on the rim of the glass or in a specially prepared sweet." I stared at the innocuous-looking stopper, comprehending little. The significance escaped me entirely at that moment. I wonder if the reader has already guessed its import. Holmes's reasoning unfolded naturally as we walked the embankment afterward. The Thames lapped coldly against the stone walls, its surface rippling with the reflections of passing barges. The wind carried the cry of gulls and the low thrum of a steam tugboat. "The poison was not in the communal food," he explained, pacing slowly, his boots clicking on the flagstones. "Sir Reginald alone collapsed. The symptoms, throat constriction, collapse without convulsions, matched the profile of a toxin that acts on the nerves, delivered in minute quantity. The locket was not merely stolen. It was the delivery mechanism, or the motive. Someone knew its contents, threatened exposure." He referenced a past case briefly as we paused by a bench, the wood weathered and cool. "It reminds me of the business with the Syrian merchant in '82, where a smuggled papyrus concealed a formula for a contact poison used in the opium trade. The artifact itself was innocent, but the knowledge it carried doomed its owner. The merchant's rival had posed as a collector, much like our players here. Objects from the East have long carried more than their weight in secrets. Watson." Complications arose when a telegram arrived via a sweating messenger boy whose cap smelled of wet felt. It reported that Mr. Ahmed Farouk had been seen boarding a ship bound for Alexandria, but not before leaving a cryptic note at his hotel. The Locket returns home. The curse claims its due. Arthur Hargrove was now under increased scrutiny from Scotland Yard, his gambling associates questioned, while Lady Voss's collection was rumoured to include pieces suspiciously similar to Hargrove's recent imports. The new understanding dawned as Holmes connected the dust from the study to samples from the warehouse crates, both containing fine quartz sand, unique to a particular Nile Delta site. The Locket held not a map, but a genuine provenance document proving certain artifacts were looted from a protected excavation. Sir Reginald planned to expose the black market to secure his reputation, or perhaps to blackmail his rivals. I didn't understand then, though I fancy some readers have already guessed the direction in which the evidence pointed. Holmes saw the truth taking shape immediately. I wonder how many of you saw it too. The evening brought further tension when we visited the mortuary. The air hung heavy with the sharp smell of formaldehyde and the underlying sweetness of decay. The stone slabs were cold and unyielding, yet the attendant's voice echoed off tiled walls as he pulled back the sheet. No visible marks, but Holmes noted faint discoloration on the lips, dry and papery to the touch, administered orally, in a form that mimicked natural seizure. As we departed, the fog rolled in thicker, muffling the sounds of the city to a distant hum. The gas lamps glowed like spectral eyes. The pieces were beginning to align, yet the full picture remained veiled. Deeper waters indeed, where the currents of greed and ancient grudges pulled strong beneath the surface of polite society. The truth hovered just out of reach. But Holmes's stride betrayed his growing certainty, and I felt the net of suspicion tightening around the guilty party. Chapter 4. Shadows and Suspicions. Over the next 2 days, our investigation fractured into a series of short, pointed encounters across London's varied quarters. First, we visited the music hall in Whitechapel, where the air thrummed with raucous laughter, the sharp smell of cheap gin and sawdust, and the tinny strains of a piano badly in need of tuning. The wooden floorboards creaked underfoot, rough and uneven. A chorus girl who had served at the gala supper as extra staff leaned close, her sequined costume scratching roughly against my sleeve. The Egyptian gent slipped something to Sir Reginald during the toast, she whispered, her breath warm with peppermint. Looked like a cordial, but the old man coughed after. Second, we went to a factory near the railway yards in Battersea. The machinery roared like a beast, shaking the iron girders and filling the air with the greasy smell of hot metal and lubricating oil. The temperature inside was sweltering compared to the raw outdoor chill that nipped at our faces. A clerk who had handled Hargrove shipments admitted under pressure that Langley had ordered extra insurance on the latest crates, unusual for legitimate goods. His hands were blackened with ink, the ledger's rough paper that crackled when turned. Third came the photography studio of a society snapper who had captured the gala. The dark room smelled sharply of chemicals, vinegar-like developer and fixer. The trays cool and slippery with liquid. Plates showed Sir Reginald laughing, the locket glinting on his chest. In one image, Farouk stood close, his hand near the chain. "Developed these myself," the photographer said, his voice echoing in the red-lit space. "Notice the shadow? Someone's fingers on the locket in the background." Fourth, in the slums of Limehouse, where opium dens exhaled sweet cloying smoke into narrow alleys paved with uneven cobbles that turned ankles. The air tasted bitter, like ash. A Chinese informant with leathery skin recounted seeing Arthur Hargrove meeting a fence known for moving stolen antiquities. His voice was low, barely rising above the distant murmur of voices and the drip of water from leaking roofs. Fifth, a brief stop at the hospital where a gala waiter had been admitted with mysterious stomach cramps. The same batch of oysters, perhaps. His bed linens were coarse and starched, the ward echoing with coughs and the clatter of bedpans. The temperature felt close and warm, heavy with the scent of carbolic and illness. Sixth, the park near Kensington, where Lady Voss walked her dogs on damp grass that was springy underfoot, the air fresh with wet earth after rain. She denied everything, but her voice faltered when Holmes mentioned the forced crates. Her silk skirts rustled softly, carrying a faint trace of patchouli perfume that clashed with the outdoor chill. False leads abounded. One theory held that the poison was in the oysters, but Holmes had samples tested at a university laboratory, where the air was sharp with reagents and the benches smooth oak. The results proved negative. Another pointed to a random thief, yet the Locket's targeted removal suggested inside knowledge. 3 men had opportunity at the supper table: Arthur, Langley, and Farouk. 3 had motive: debt, business rivalry, artifact theft. Which would you suspect, dear reader? I confess I was lost among the conflicting accounts. Were you? The tension built as anonymous notes arrived at Baker Street, one smelling of cheap ink and bearing a threat: cease or join the cursed. Holmes burned it in the grate, the paper curling with an acrid scent that lingered in the room. The net was closing. Shadows lengthened in every alley and drawing room. Suspicions swirled like the river fog, but Holmes's quiet confidence suggested the pieces were falling into place, even if my own mind raced in circles. The truth lurked in the details we had gathered, waiting for the final illumination. Chapter 5. The Pursuit. The pursuit began at dawn. The following day, when a tip from Lestrade led us to the docks once more, action erupted as we spotted a figure matching Farouk's description boarding a barge laden with crates. The air was thick with the smell of river mud and creosote-treated wood, the water lapping coldly against hulls. Holmes shouted, "The game is afoot!" And we gave chase, on foot, along the slippery wharf. Our boots pounded on damp planks that resonated with hollow thuds. The suspect fled toward a warehouse, his coat flapping. The sounds of our pursuit mingled with the clang of ship bells and the distant train whistle from the nearby station. I drew my service revolver, its metal grip cool and reassuring in my palm. We burst into the dim interior, where the air hung heavy with the musty odor of burlap and spices from unpacked crates. Stacks of Egyptian artifacts loomed, their stone surfaces rough and ancient under my probing hand. Farouk turned, cornered, but produced a knife, only to drop it when Holmes disarmed him with a swift cane strike. The wood cracked sharply against bone. My key evidence spilled from his satchel, the locket itself pried open to reveal not a map, but a folded papyrus fragment and a small vial of clear liquid. The locket's interior was lined with soft felt, now stained, and the chain bore faint scratches. "It was never cursed," Farouk gasped in accented English, his breath ragged. "It was proof. Sir Reginald forged documents to launder looted goods. I represented the Egyptian authorities." Holmes examined the vial, holding it to the light, filtering through dusty windows. The poison. Extract of a rare nightshade variant, stabilized with laboratory alcohol, administered via a hidden compartment in the locket's clasp, triggered when opened during the toast. A drop transferred to the finger, then to the wineglass rim. Elegant and deniable. His reasoning followed in the warehouse's relative quiet after the suspect was secured. Observe the vial's residue, Watson. The oily texture matching the blotter stain. The papyrus proves the smuggling ring involved Langley, and surprisingly, Dr. Crow, who provided medical cover. Farouk here sought to retrieve the evidence, not kill, but someone else used the gala for murder. He drew on a past case, conversationally, as we waited for the police launch, the river's chill breeze carrying salt and diesel. Much like the Venetian glassblower affair of '79, where a seemingly cursed artifact masked a poisoning ring among collectors. The method was contact transfer, the motive greed over provenance. Experience teaches that the most theatrical curses hide the most mundane crimes. Stakes raised when a shot rang out from the shadows, Langley attempting to silence Farouk. We returned fire, yet the report echoing off warehouse walls, the smell of cordite sharp and acrid. Langley fled, but left behind a glove stained with the same reddish dust. I admit I was utterly confused by the web of international intrigue and personal betrayal. The evidence pointed in multiple directions. I confess I was lost. Perhaps you, dear reader, saw the pattern more clearly amid the chaos. Resolution approached as we raced by hansom to confront the remaining suspects. The cab wheels rumbled over uneven roads, the horse's breath steaming in the morning cold. The Locket's secrets were unfolding, and with them the identity of the true poisoner. The river watched silently, its depths hiding no more than the human heart. Chapter 6. The past speaks. Criminal backgrounds came to light in the days that followed, pieced together from police files, telegrams to Cairo, and interviews in hushed offices. Langley, we learned, had a long history in the artifact black market. His warehouses in the East End had served as fronts for years. The air in the Scotland Yard record room smelled of old paper and ink, the files yellowed and brittle to the touch, their pages rustling like dry leaves. Motive clarified when we discovered ledgers hidden in his Mayfair safe, rough iron-bound books with entries in a spidery hand detailing payments for looted items. Sir Reginald had discovered the scheme and planned to expose it at the gala, using the Locket's papyrus as proof. The temperature in the room dropped as we read, the fire in the grate offering little warmth against the chill revelation. Connections formed when Arthur Hargrove's debts were traced not to gambling alone, but to loans from Langley's associates. I knew nothing of the murder, Arthur insisted in his club, the brandy glass cool and smooth in his hand, its contents carrying the burn of alcohol on the tongue. Father threatened me, yes, but Langley, he promised to cover my debts if I looked the other way on the shipments. Dr. Crow's involvement emerged from hospital records and a chemist's testimony. He had refined the poison in a university laboratory. The air there was thick with the acrid bite of acids and the hum of Bunsen burners. Lady Voss had been a buyer, her collection built on tainted goods, her perfume masking the moral rot. I reflect now on those tense days, the long nights at Baker Street, where Holmes paced, his footsteps soft on the carpet, the violin occasionally wailing a mournful air that filled the rooms with vibrating strings. The smells of strong coffee and shag tobacco sustained us, while outside the city noises, clattering hooves, vendors' calls, the occasional peal of Big Ben, reminded me of the wider world untouched by our grim puzzle. I felt the weight of lives hanging in the balance, the innocent Arthur nearly ruined by association. Set up for resolution came when Holmes arranged a meeting at the British Museum, among the Egyptian galleries where stone sarcophagi stood silent and cool, the air dry with the dust of millennia. The past speaks clearly now, Holmes said quietly. Greed bridged continents, and one man chose murder to silence exposure. The signs were there all along, in the dust, the vial, the arguments. In hindsight, we should have known. The evidence lay before us, hidden in plain sight, if only we had looked with Holmes's clarity. But I missed much, to my regret. Perhaps the reader noted the discrepancies sooner. The pieces were connecting at last, forming a picture darker than the fog-bound nights we had traversed. Justice hovered near, and with it, the restoration of order to shattered lives. Chapter 7. The truth emerges. The confrontation unfolded in Langley's warehouse at dusk. The air was thick with the Thames's briny reek and the oily tang of lantern fuel. Crates cast long shadows under the flickering light, their wooden slats rough against my shoulder as we hid. Langley arrived with a valise, his breathing heavy, the sound of his boots scraping on the stone floor. Holmes stepped forward. "It ends here, Mr. Langley. The poison was yours, refined with Crow's aid. EU slipped the drop onto the Locket during the intermission argument, knowing Sir Reginald would open it proudly at the toast. The transfer to his glass was seamless. Farouk was your rival for the goods, but you acted to protect the ring." Langley paled, his voice rising in denial. "You have no proof. This is madness." Holmes continued through natural dialogue, explaining without flourish. "Observe the glove you dropped during the pursuit. Same dust as the study in crates. The Locket's clasp mechanism, cleverly modified, held the vial. You argued with Sir Reginald over exposure. The gala provided cover. Dr. Crowe certified the apoplexy to avoid autopsy. Lady Voss bought your silence with purchases. Arthur was the perfect red herring. His debt's known. Langley lunged for a hidden pistol, its metal cold as I wrestled it away. The struggle sent a crate tumbling with a crash that echoed like thunder. Miss Hargrove, present at Holmes's invitation, gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. My father, for profit. Reactions were swift. Langley cursed, his face twisted with rage. He would have ruined everything, the business, the money, years of work. Holmes pressed on. When you have eliminated the theatrical curse, what remains is simple greed. The locket was the perfect vehicle, public, symbolic, easily tampered with beforehand in the warehouse. The poison acted quickly, mimicking heart failure. You counted on the chaos and the doctor's word. Justice began as Lestrade's men swarmed in, the whistles shrill against the warehouse din. Langley was bound, his curses filling the air with venom. Crowe and Voss were rounded up separately later that night, their protests fading into the darkness. Holmes explained further as we stood by the river afterward. The water lapped softly, the temperature dropping with the evening mist. The locket's hidden compartment was the key. Sir Reginald opened it to show the papyrus, transferring the poison to his finger and then to his wine. Elegant, deniable, and deadly in plain sight. I marvel at how the solution unfolded. Holmes saw the truth immediately. I wonder how many of you saw it too, piecing together the dust, the cork, the rivalries. The truth was revealed at last, raw and unflinching, stripping away the veils of society and superstition. Consequences would follow swiftly. But in that moment, the air felt lighter. The city's noises, the distant rumble of carts, the call of gulls, meant the soft hiss of gas lamps sounded like a triumphant chorus rather than a concealing murmur. The shadows of the warehouse receded, and for the first time since the gala, the weight of uncertainty lifted. Chapter 8. Justice. The arrest of Theodore Langley, Dr. Elias Crowe, and Lady Amelia Voss unfolded with grim efficiency at Scotland Yard, the next morning. The building smelled of polished wood and strong tea, the cell's iron bars cold and unyielding under the hand. Langley sat defiant at first, his waistcoat rumpled but cracked under questioning, admitting the poisoning to safeguard his smuggling empire. Reginald would have ruined us all, he snarled, the words tasting bitter in the stale air. The criminal's response turned to bluster, then despair as the evidence mounted. The modified locket was produced in court, its mechanism clicking open with a soft, metallic sound. Crowe confessed to providing the toxin, his hands trembling on the witness stand, the paper of his statement crisp and official. Voss wept, her perfume now cloying in the close courtroom, claiming she was merely a buyer. Questions answered in the trial that followed. The poison was a custom alkaloid, fast-acting and mimicking heart failure, delivered via the locket's clasp during the victim's proud display. The international angle involved Egyptian officials seeking repatriation, with Farouk cleared as an ally. Arthur's name was cleared of direct involvement, his debts restructured through the estate. Impact on others rippled outward. Miss Eleanor Hargrove inherited the legitimate business, her face lighting with quiet relief in the solicitor's office, and where leather-bound books smelled of age and the fire crackled warmly. The Hargrove warehouses reopened under honest management, the docks bustling once more with legitimate trade, the air filled with the honest shouts of workers and the creak of ropes. The consequences unfolded in the weeks after, with sentences handed down, Langley to the gallows for murder, Crowe and Voss to long imprisonment. Society whispered of the cursed locket, no more. The artifact now rested safely in the British Museum, its secrets laid bare under glass cases that felt cool to the touch. Nothing, in my experience, prepared me for the revelation's depth, the way one man's greed had poisoned not just a body, but an entire network of lives and artifacts. The truth, when it emerged fully, was darker than any of us expected. Yet, justice brought a measure of light. In the Old Bailey, the oak-panelled courtroom echoed with the judge's gavel, its sound sharp and final. The guilty were removed, their footsteps fading down stone corridors, cool and echoing. Outside, the city resumed its rhythm. The clatter of hansoms, the call of newsboys, the distant rumble of trains, the parks smelled of wet earth and fallen leaves, and the Thames flowed on, indifferent yet cleansed of one more shadow. The aftermath brought quiet satisfaction. Arthur Hargrove walked free, his head held higher, while Eleanor began rebuilding the family name. The once tainted shipments were examined openly at universities, the air humming with scholarly discussion instead of secrecy. London felt a little cleaner, its music halls and markets carrying on without the hidden weight of that deadly gala night. Justice had been served. Again, the net had closed, and the consequences continued to unfold in the lives touched by Sir Reginald's death. The city breathed easier under the autumn skies, its gas lamps flickering as evening fell, casting steady light where darkness had once lingered. Chapter 9. Restoration. The legal conclusion came swiftly in the Old Bailey, the oak-panelled courtroom echoing with the judge's gavel, its sound sharp and final. Sentences were pronounced amid the rustle of gowns and the faint smell of wig powder. The guilty were removed, their footsteps fading down stone corridors, cool and echoing. The innocent were cleared with public apologies. Arthur Hargrove stood vindicated, his debts forgiven through the estate. His face regained colour as he shook Holmes's hand in the corridors, the marble floors smooth underfoot. "I owe you my name, sir," he said, and voice thick with emotion. Futures shone brightly for some. Eleanor Hargrove married a steady clerk from the family firm, the wedding held in a small church where incense mingled with flower scents. The pews were warm from sunlight streaming through stained glass. The legitimate antiquities trade flourished, new shipments arriving without taint, examined openly at universities where the air hummed with scholarly discussion and the benches smelled of fresh varnish. Normalcy returned to Baker Street in gradual waves. The violin sang again in the evenings, its notes soaring above the street noises of vendors and carriages. Mrs. Hudson's meals carried the comforting aromas of roast beef and fresh bread, the tablecloth starched and crisp. Holmes resumed his monographs, the paper whispering under his pen, while the Persian slipper of tobacco sent curls of shag smoke into the room. I reflect now on this case with a quiet satisfaction. The Locket was never cursed. Men were. Greed had bridged continents and poisoned a life in plain sight, yet truth and justice had prevailed. The once shadowed warehouses along the Thames now bustled with honest labour, the air filled with the honest clang of cranes and the salt tang of the river. Arthur walked the streets freely, no longer haunted by suspicion, while Eleanor began restoring the family's good name with steady, determined grace. Looking back, the clue was plain as day in the rivalries and the dust. Did you see what I missed in those early days? I failed to connect the details at first. Perhaps you fared better. Dear reader, following the thread through London's maze, order was restored at last. The shadows dispelled and London breathed easier. Its parks and streets resumed their timeless dance under the autumn skies, the gas lamps glowing warmly against the evening chill. The city's music halls rang with laughter once more, untainted by hidden motives, and the docks carried legitimate cargo under clear consciences. The Hargrove name stood clean again, the innocent cleared, and futures brightened where darkness had threatened. In the quiet moments that followed, I often walked the same embankment where Holmes and I had pondered the case. The Thames lapped gently against the stone, its surface rippling with passing barges, carrying away the last remnants of the affair. The air tasted cleaner, the wind fresher, and the distant calls of gulls seemed lighter. Restoration had come, not only to the family, but to the truth itself. The adventure of the cursed locket had ended, leaving behind only the steady rhythm of London life and the knowledge that justice, though sometimes slow, always finds its way through the fog. Chapter 10. Baker Street Reflections. The fire crackled merrily in the grate at 221B Baker Street, casting a warm golden glow over the familiar clutter of books, chemical apparatus, and the old Persian rug worn thin by years of pacing. The air smelled comfortably of Holmes's shag tobacco and the faint, rich leather of our armchairs. Outside, a light rain pattered softly on the windows, its steady rhythm soothing against the glass, while distant Big Ben tolled the hour with deep, resonant chimes that carried through the damp night air. News of the case's final aftermath arrived via the evening paper, its pages crisp and inky. The report detailed Langley's execution in stark columns, the smuggling ring fully dismantled, and the looted artifacts safely returned to Egypt under Farouk's care. The city seemed to breathe a little easier, the scandal fading into whispered conversations in clubs and drawing rooms. Holmes and I sat discussing the matter over glasses of whiskey. The liquid was smooth and peaty on the tongue, spreading a gentle warmth through the evening chill. "A fine puzzle," Holmes remarked, his long fingers steepled in his lap for once in relaxed contemplation. Greed, disguised as an ancient curse. Elementary. Once the physical traces were allowed to speak. The locket, the dust, the modified clasp. All spoke plainly for those willing to listen. We talked at length of the case's broader threads, how it had touched the bustling docks and the glittering gala alike, revealing the hidden veins of commerce and crime that ran through London. Lives had been altered, some ruined by their own ambition, others renewed by truth. Arthur Hargrove now walked the streets with his head high, his debts settled, and his name cleared. Eleanor had begun restoring the family business with quiet determination, her future bright, where once it had been shadowed by grief and suspicion. I reflected on the transformations we had witnessed. The criminal, once concealed behind respectability and theatrical superstition, now exposed and caught. The innocent, wrongly suspected, stood vindicated at last. Yet the baffling mystery had resolved itself through careful observation and logical steps, each piece falling into place like the final notes of a well-played melody. Holmes had moved from restless energy to triumphant clarity, while I had journeyed from puzzlement to deep admiration for his methods. The rain continued its gentle patter, mixing with the occasional clatter of a late, hansom cab on the wet cobblestones below and the distant murmur of the city that never truly slept. The room felt cocooned against the world, the fire's warmth contrasting the cool dampness pressing against the window panes. Holmes occasionally puffed on his pipe, sending fragrant curls of smoke toward the ceiling, while I turned the pages of my notebook, the paper smooth and slightly cool under my fingers. Into those who followed this account through its twists and fog-bound streets, I offer this final word. The truth often hides not in the dramatic or the supernatural, but in the smallest details: the dust on a boot, the stain on a blotter, the tremor in a voice. Holmes saw them clearly from the beginning. I learned much from them, as I hope you have too, dear reader. May your own observations serve you as well in life's many mysteries. The case of the cursed locket was closed at last. Only the quiet satisfaction of justice served and friendship reaffirmed remained in our Baker Street home. The violin lay silent for the night, the lamps burned low, and the rain whispered its lullaby against the glass. London continued its endless rhythm beyond our windows: markets, music halls, factories, and then the great river, all untouched by the shadows we had dispelled. In the end, order had been restored, and peace, however brief, had returned to our rooms. As I set down my pen, I felt a profound sense of completion. The adventure had tested us, enlightened us, and reminded us both of the enduring power of reason over superstition. Holmes, sensing my mood, gave a small nod of understanding, his eyes gleaming with that familiar light. No further words were needed. The fire crackled on, the rain fell softly, and Baker Street settled into its well-earned quiet.